Welcome back to Secret Weapons, and today we're taking a look at the CooperFX Outward version 2. If you clicked onto this video not feeling entirely sure what the Outward is, that's alright, because when I tried the prototype of this at NAMM, I wasn't sure I got it. When my friend Andrew over at Ambient Endeavors started posting videos of this thing, I still wasn't sure that I got it. When this thing arrived at my house, I wasn't convinced I knew what it was. I know that it does sampling and granular stuff, but that's a pretty ambiguous way of looking at things. Especially if you're a guitar player and you don't understand anything beyond overdrive, delay, reverb. We're cavemen in that respect. But despite the feature-rich, UI simple state of things here, I can confidently say that this thing, confusing or not, capable of being parsed out or not, this thing is a great sound design tool. It's also a really great conventional application tool in a sense. So let's start with what this thing does at its core. This is essentially a granular sampler. It takes little pieces of your guitar input and grabs onto them, stretches them, chops them, smooths them out, just as a variety of very wizardy things to your guitar signal. When you look at the layout on this pedal, you will see three little lights with S, C, and TS on them, and those stand for smooth, choppy, and time stretching, which are the three main ways that you're going to manipulate your guitar signal with this thing. I often feel like the smoothing effect that pedals like this have feels the way that I kind of wish a compressor was, where you just kind of have that input and then it just drags that note farther than it was ever meant to. And that was the principal application that I found for this thing initially, was I realized that there was smoothing features that I could use in this thing that would let me play a lead part that would just sound larger than life, because it would grab onto little bits of it, both at unity pitch or at an octave above or an octave below, depending on your settings here, and really just create these massive, almost like you have a sustainer in your guitar, and it's really cool. The inclusion of a tone knob and a clock are both really, really phenomenal, because you've got your pitch and your direction, your size, and your speed and your sensitivity, but this clock really allows you to create nearly in time with your original guitar sounds, all the way down to playing notes, nearly forgetting that they're supposed to be there, and then having them come dragging back from the pits. It's really cool. The tone knob is great. It's very subtle, so it just kind of can give you a little bit of that lo-fi feel, or can kind of give those repeats and those stutters and stuff like that the punctuation that they really need. Independent wet and dry controls on this, rather than a standard wet-dry ratioed knob, is a huge win for this thing, because sometimes you want a ton of both. Sometimes you want no dry, but you want that wet to kind of still feel like it's in the background a little bit, especially when you're stacking guitar parts in a looper or something like that, and you're using this to really build out some of your textures and some of your sci-fi larger than life moments. You really want to be able to mix in exactly how much you want of these octave up, shimmery, stuttery kind of moments. Now, one of the most crucial things in this pedal to me is this little guy right here. This is your MIDI input, and it is incredibly valuable because, once again, this thing has a plethora of controls and alternate functions for these three controls depending on the mode you're in. So saving all that stuff and recalling it later is crucial. Just in recording the intro piece for this video, I came across 5 different sounds on this thing that I really loved and saved to presets on the Morningstar, and I can guarantee you that I'm going to be going back to those frequently, and I would probably never find them again if I didn't have a MIDI controller saving the presets in this thing and being able to recall them later. I think a big thing to demystifying pedals like this is understanding the difference between the different sampler, granular kind of pedals in the space. People might be confused at the difference between the outward and the count to 5, which is right here, or like the tensor, which is, I don't have a tensor, but I wish I did, so let's just Photoshop a really lazily edited photo of a tensor right here, if I'm not too lazy to do it later. But I think it's important to know the difference between these things. This is a looper and delay first and foremost that can kind of get into granular modes, whereas this is a granular sampler first and foremost. There are some delay modes in here. There are some cool octavey things in here, but you're not just gonna put together your standard reverse delays or your standard like looping parts, even shortish looping parts like you would with a count to 5 or a tensor or something. This is like almost dissecting the guitar parts and then bringing them back in ways that you could never do without a pedal like this. It's really kind of transformative and transformational. To kind of wrap up here, I think the thing I find most impressive about the Outward is the subtlety. I think a lot of granular pedals can get really wacky really quickly. And this thing is capable of some of that. We'll dive into some stuttery, kind of sputtery stuff during the sound run that we're about to get into. But the subtlety here is what I really love. We're gonna roll through a bunch of the settings, but I think that one of the kind of core things that you will notice that permeates throughout the rest of this video is even if you don't feel like you have 100% handle on what the pedal is doing, you do feel like it's working with you, which I really like. And I really find to be very, very musical and very, very helpful for writing interesting parts and reimagining the kind of stuff that you usually play. Without saying too much more about it, let's just dive in, listen to some sounds, and see what kind of strange, otherworldly sounds we can coax out of the CooperFX Outward. Okay, so before we dive into this, we're not going to go through every single setting on the Outward because there's a lot of them. But we are going to focus a little bit on some standout moments from the smooth, choppy, and time-stretchy modes and how they interact with the other pieces in this signal chain, because that's what we do around here. So let's start off with our dry tone, which is the Duke Silver Compressor into the Strymon Iridium. The Polymoon and the Immerse. And the CooperFX Outward. So this is a setting that I find sounds amazing with a little extra modulation thrown in. So let's add the warped vinyl in. Here's a setting I really like for kind of moving through your regular parts and then being able to stop and grab something when it kind of strikes you.